He sat by the fire outside the house, back resting against a fence post, eyes trained on the front door. The tin of beans remained untouched beside him, kept warm on a rock near the coals. Every now and then he glanced up at the second story window where he had seen her, thin, silent, watchful like a fawn ready to bolt. He didn't blame her. A girl like that, living alone in a broken-down house in the middle of nowhere, how long had she been surviving like that? How many nights had she gone without food, without safety? By dawn, the beans were cold and Will's back ached from the hard ground. He stood, brushed off his coat, and set the tin on the porch. Just beans and a small chunk of bread. Then, without knocking, without shouting, he turned and walked to the barn. He worked all day, repaired 2 fence posts, cleared thorn brush from the side of the house, hauled water from the spring down the ridge since the pump still wasn't drawing. Every task served 2 purposes: fixing the ranch and giving the girl space. He didn't look toward the house once, though he felt eyes on him the entire time. That evening, as the sky turned orange and coyotes began to call, he returned to the porch. The tin was empty. The bread was gone. Will allowed himself a slow nod. The next few days passed in quiet rhythm. Will didn't try to approach her again. Instead, he left food on the porch each morning: beans, jerky, stale biscuits, whatever he had. And each night it would vanish. A silent exchange. No words, no signs, just proof she was still there. Alive. She never came out while he was near. But once, while checking the chicken coop near the back of the barn, he thought he caught a glimpse, a figure crouched by the stream, filling a rusted tin cup with water. She slipped away the moment he moved. He let her. Will knew fear. He knew what it felt like to be hunted by men with rifles, to sleep with one eye open, to trust no one. Whatever had happened to that girl, it had left scars deeper than the ones he could see on her arms and legs. Then, on the 5th morning, something changed. Will stepped outside to place breakfast on the porch, but something was already waiting. There, a small bundle of wildflowers wrapped with a bit of twine. He froze. She had left him something. It wasn't much. But to a man like Will, hardened and hollowed out by life, it was more than enough to pierce the quiet wall around his heart. That afternoon, he made a careful decision. He walked to the general store in Bent Creek and bought flour, sugar, dried apples, and a small sack of sweet candy sticks. The storekeeper raised an eyebrow at the candy, but Will didn't explain. That night, instead of beans, he made apple flapjacks over the fire, letting the sweet smell drift up toward the house. He added 1 candy stick to the plate and placed it carefully on the porch. Then he sat down several yards away, back to the barn, hat pulled low over his face, and waited. An hour passed. Then, too, just when he was about to doze off, he heard the creak of the front door. Slow, hesitant. He didn't move. A moment later, the sound of footsteps soft as feathers on the porch. Then silence. When he opened his eyes a few minutes later, the plate was gone. The candy stick wrapper lay beside the porch post, empty. She was still afraid, but curiosity was blooming. Hunger, maybe trust. The next morning something new appeared. This time it wasn't flowers, it was a small carved figure. Roughly shaped from driftwood, it looked like a horse, with lines etched into its flank using a knife or sharp rock. Will turned it in his hand, astonished by the detail. For someone so young, she had skill. She's an artist, he muttered. And perhaps not as alone as she seemed. Later that week, during a storm, the roof of the back shed caved in. Will was inside when it happened, pulling old boards for firewood when the weight of water and rot crushed half the beams. A plank slammed across his ribs, knocking the wind out of him. He managed to crawl out, gasping and muddy, blood dripping from his temple. By the time he made it to the barn, night had fallen and his vision blurred. He collapsed in the hay and didn't wake until morning. When he opened his eyes, he felt something strange. A blanket, not his, was draped across his chest, and beside him, resting on a flat stone, was a poultice of crushed herbs already applied to his temple. He sat up, groaning, heart thundering. She had come to him. She had tended to him. She had helped. The walls between them weren't just crumbling, they were gone. That evening, for the first time, he lit a fire just outside the porch and sat with 2 tin plates. He didn't speak, didn't call her. But after 10 long minutes, the front door creaked. She stepped out. Slowly, carefully, wrapped in an old woven blanket, her bare feet silent against the wood. She didn't look at him directly, just sat across the fire and stared into the flames. She was thinner than he realized, her cheeks hollow, collarbones sharp. Her hair was long, black as raven feathers, braided down her back with bits of colored thread. A deep bruise still lingered on her arm. They ate in silence. Halfway through the meal, she spoke just 2 words in broken English. "You? Stay?" Will looked at her, startled. He nodded. "Yeah, I'll stay." Her gaze flicked to him, then back to the fire. Good. For the first time in years, Will Travers felt something crack open inside him. It wasn't just a ranch he'd bought. It was a doorway into something unexpected, something human, something holy. End of part 2. Let me know when you're ready for part 3. A ranch divided. A family reborn, expanded to 1,000 words. You said. The house that once felt like a tomb now echoed with quiet life. The girl whose name, he eventually learned, was Nita started helping him repair the sagging porch, mend chicken coops, and even cook simple meals. Her English was sparse, but her eyes spoke volumes, sharp, intelligent, observant. She moved like a shadow but worked like someone twice her age, and gradually, the tension between them dissolved. Nita had lived in the house since the raid, a brutal cavalry operation too, winters ago, that had wiped out her family's camp just over the ridge. She had hidden in the crawl space as soldiers burned everything. She had survived by stealing scraps from travelers and drinking from the creek. Alone. For months. Will listened. And for once in his life, he didn't try to fix everything with words. He just stayed. Together they turned the broken ranch into something almost livable. Will taught her how to patch saddles, plant beans, and clean a rifle. She taught him how to trap rabbits without spooking them, how to use ash and sage to keep insects away, how to listen to the land like it was speaking Dot, and in the stillness of early mornings, with mist rising off the fields, they found something close to peace. But the outside world was still watching. Rumors spread through Bent Creek fast. Folks had always thought it odd that Will Travers had bought a cursed ranch for $1, but now the stories twisted. People claimed he was harboring a savage girl, that she was dangerous, even possessed. Some said she was a spirit left behind by the massacre. Others said he was taking her as a squaw bride. Filthy lies spoken by mouths that had never known kindness. The first confrontation came when a group of 3 ranchers rode out uninvited. Will saw them coming dust on the trail, rifles across saddles. He told Nita to stay inside. The lead man, Curtis Boone, was a loudmouth with yellow teeth and a whiskey gut. "You best send that Apache out," he sneered, spitting tobacco on the porch. "Ain't safe letting her live here. You don't know what them people are capable of." Will didn't flinch. "She's a child. She's a damn trespasser. She's family," Will said evenly, his hand resting on the butt of his revolver. "And I don't recall a skin for your opinion." Boone's eyes narrowed. "You talking their side now?" "I'm talking the side of decency." One of the other men shifted nervously, clearly uneasy. Boone didn't press. "Not that day, but the warning was clear they'd be back. That night, Will didn't sleep. He stood on the porch, shotgun in hand, watching the tree line. He wasn't afraid. For himself? But Nita? She was a child of war, of fire and blood. And she had trusted him. He wouldn't let the world take that from her. The next day, he rode to the sheriff's office. The old lawman, Marshal Fry, scratched his beard when Will told him what happened. Word is, you're stirring up hornets. Fry muttered, boys don't take kindly to Indians living among 'em. She's not a threat. Doesn't matter. Truth don't carry weight out here. Fear does? Will's voice was steel. So you gonna help? Or you gonna watch? Them burn my place down? Fry hesitated, then sighed. I'll do what I can. But you're on your own out there. The next few days were tense. Nita grew quiet again. She stayed indoors, windows covered, barely speaking. Will hated seeing her retreat like that, but he understood. The same people who destroyed her home once were now circling again. Then, on the 6th morning, something strange happened. Will woke to the sound of drums. Low, rhythmic, far off, but approaching. He stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand, and froze. They were coming. Dozens of riders, Apache warriors, descending the ridgeline silently, except for the deep beat of a ceremonial drum. Their faces were painted. Spears glinted in the morning light. At least 30 of them. Possibly more. Will's breath caught in his throat. He turned to Nita, who stood in the doorway, her hand to her mouth. One figure stepped forward from the column, a tall, older man with gray in his braids and the face of someone who had seen war and peace both. He dismounted slowly, handed his spear to another rider, and approached. Will stayed still. The man spoke in a quiet, firm voice, Apache at first. Then, with effort, English. You are the one who gave her safety? Will nodded. I tried. The warrior's eyes didn't blink. She is the daughter of Grey Hawk, last of his blood. We looked for her, thought her dead. Nita stepped forward. Uncle, she whispered. The man turned to her and knelt, arms wide. She ran into them without hesitation. Will felt his throat tighten. They didn't come to take her away. They came to honor him. That evening, the Apache built a fire circle on Will's land. They brought food, roasted deer, corn cakes, sweet herbs. They danced and sang, old songs that hadn't been heard in Bent Creek since before the settlers arrived. Nita sat by Will's side the entire time, her eyes full of tears and light. When the dancing ended, the elder approached Will once more. You did not treat her as a burden. You treated her as one of your own. For that, we owe you. Will shook his head. You owe me nothing. The man smiled. Then let us offer friendship. This land once ours can now be shared. He pressed something into Will's hand. A carved stone pendant, a blessing of protection. You are not alone anymore, cowboy. Weeks later, the ranch was still quiet, but no longer lonely. Some of the townsfolk avoided Will now, whispered when he walked past. But others, curious, even respectful, began stopping by with supplies or greetings. A few of them saw the ranch wasn't cursed, it was growing, healing, and so was he. Will had once bought a broken ranch for $1 just to escape the noise of the world, but he found something priceless inside, a girl who had every reason to fear him and chose instead to trust him, a child of the land, a niece of warriors, and now part of his family. Will Travers hadn't planned to ride into Bent Creek. In truth, he hadn't planned anything in months. Since burying his younger brother in a shallow grave out near Laredo, Will had simply kept riding, chasing the horizon, outrunning the memories, and letting the sun carve deeper lines into his face. He was 35 but looked older. Dust clung to his coat. His horse limped from a stone bruise. And Will's eyes, those steel blue eyes, held a weariness no sleep could cure. Bent Creek was the kind of place people forgot existed. One crooked saloon, a half-collapsed general store, and a sheriff too old to shoot straight. Will tied his horse outside the saloon and stepped inside, just wanting water, maybe a bite if his coins could stretch. He wasn't looking for conversation, but conversation found him anyway. Looking for work or a grave? An old barkeep asked, raising a brow at Will's battered hat and sun-leathered hands. Whichever's cheaper, Will replied deadpan. The old man chuckled, sliding a tin cup across the counter. Well, I got something that might interest a man like you. There's a ranch about 6 miles out, been abandoned for years. Owner's long gone. The deed's floating around with no claim. Town just wants someone to keep the roof from fouling. In word is, you could have it for $1 just to get it off the books. Will blinked. $1? Yep. Just sign your name and it's yours. You'd be doing the town a favor. Will thought about it. A place to call his own, even if it was falling apart, sounded better than wandering until his boots wore through. He didn't ask why it was abandoned. Didn't ask why no one else wanted it. He had nothing left to lose. So he followed the barkeep to the sheriff's office, signed a barely legible deed, handed over a single silver coin, and rode out toward the crumbling property just before dusk. The land was quiet, too quiet. The ranch sat at the edge of low hills, surrounded by overgrown grass and rusted fencing. The house itself leaned to one side like it had given up on standing straight. The barn had holes in the roof, and the wind whistled through the cracked windows like ghosts sighing. But it was land. It was still, and it was his Will dismounted, stretched, and walked through the front door of the house. The hinges groaned and dust exploded in the air. He took a deep breath and coughed musty, old, untouched air. There were signs someone had once lived here: a broken chair, a rusted kettle, even a few moldy books in a shelf that had nearly rotted away. But no fresh footprints, no candles, nothing to say the place had seen life in years. He chose to sleep in the barn that night. The house gave him a feeling something uneasy, something not quite right. He spread his bedroll in the loft, fed his horse, and sat in silence, listening to the sounds of the prairie, coyotes in the distance, wind brushing through the high grass, and the occasional hoot of an owl. He didn't hear the quiet footsteps, but something watched him. The next day, Will got to work. He patched a hole in the barn roof with leftover tin, cleared out a wasp's nest, and tried fixing the well pump. Sweat soaked his shirt and every muscle ached by sundown. But it felt good to build instead of bury. That night, he lit a small fire outside the house and boiled a tin of beans. As he stirred, he thought he saw movement, just a flicker in the corner window of the ranch house. A shadow. He froze. Stared. Nothing. He chalked it up to nerves. Maybe the wind. Maybe a trick of light. But something gnawed at him. The third night, he couldn't ignore it anymore. He was standing inside the house, hammering a loose floorboard, when he heard it creak upstairs, deliberate, too heavy for a rat. Too slow for the wind. Will dropped the hammer, hand drifting to the revolver at his hip. Quietly, he moved toward the staircase, every step careful. The boards groaned under his weight. When he reached the top, he scanned the hallway. Empty. Only 3 doors, 2 bedrooms, and a storage room. He opened the first door. Nothing but dust and a broken cot. The second. An empty room. Moonlight spilling across cracked wallpaper. Then, the third. He pushed it open, slow and cautious. There, crouched behind a broken dresser, was a girl no more than 15 or 16, dressed in torn deerskin, hair tangled, face smeared with dirt. Her eyes were dark and wide, locked on him like a cornered animal. She didn't move, didn't blink. Just stared. Will raised both hands, showing he meant no harm. You live here?" he asked softly. Got no reply. I didn't know. I didn't mean to scare you. Still silence. She looked thin, far too thin. Her ribs pressed through her skin, and she had no shoes. Just bruised feet and a sharp piece of metal gripped in one trembling hand. Will took a slow breath. I ain't gonna hurt you. I didn't come to throw anybody out. I bought this place fair, but if you've been here a while, we'll figure something out. Nothing. She didn't speak, but her shoulders lowered just a little. Still tense, still afraid, but maybe, just maybe, not ready to run. Will backed away from the door. I'll be outside. If you're hungry, I've got beans. He turned and walked down the stairs, heart pounding. What had he just stepped into?